Well, good morning. Today is July 26, 2015. My name is Carl Connor. Welcome to the Stepping Stones Project. Today we're talking about Ecclesiastes chapter 3, turn, turn, turn. So in our text here, I want to kind of go through and just pick it apart little pieces at a time. And I was asking the church if they could help me out as we go through and try to think about examples for this, examples where some of the pieces come together. So Jesus, of course, tells us that there are seasons. In fact, he comments that there are, he says, you're looking for what happens at the end of time. You know how to read the weather. You know how to read the seasons. You know when it's time to plant. They didn't have a calendar per se that they all would go and look and say, oh, look, my smartphone told me that it's time to plant in 2 days. They would instead, of course, use the variety of things around them. And in some ways, I kind of relate to the same calendar. We talk about fishing. For me personally, I've noted that, I always say, Amy, that when the azaleas are in bloom, I think that's the yellow bush, I think that's the right name for them. When the azaleas are in bloom, bluegill are on the nest. Here in fishing here locally, we always talk about that there's a shad run here in Virginia for shad up the rivers. And the general rule of thumb is if the cherry trees are in bloom, there's shad in the river. Just kind of general. And so it's a clock in a sense, and it's a way to go through and sort of see what happens and the various things that are happening in our worlds. But to everything, there is a season. And so this idea of there being a cyclical event that goes through, that there's a time for every matter under heaven that the Bible tells us, it's there. And, it's kind of interesting because we see these things happen in our lives, and it's so... I think it's a controlling issue, at least it is for me, that I want to control the calendar of my life, and I want to control the things that are happening, and I control the pieces that occur. And, I don't know what I am now. I'm not a kid anymore, and I'm definitely kind of passing through, through middle age here somewhere. I've kind of joked with you all about the gray in my beard and the gray in my hair and so forth. I'm smiling over at my wife, and when she... Forgive, you may get mad at me for this, honey, but when there's a couple of gray hairs in her head and so forth, and I think she's even prettier now with a couple of gray hairs than she ever was without them. And we certainly see all these things here. Oh, she blushed. Anyway, that was cute. Anyway, but as we see these things change, I'm reminded to, the seasons, of course, that are within our life. And so, a time to be born and a time to die. And I think about that as, we focus so much upon the births that are in our lives, and we celebrate them, and certainly it's there. But I'm reminded, if I can wax philosophical, to the Star Trek movies, as, Captain Kirk comments that, surely how we deal with death is as important as how we deal with life. You'll know that line from the movies. And I have to kind of agree with him that, I think that probably is correct, and how we deal with the things that pass and how we deal with the change. Verse 3 is somewhat challenging, a time to kill and a time to heal. Sarah and I are having some really interesting conversations now as she gets older, and she's like, well, is it ever just, I'm putting words in her mouth, but is it ever just for us to go to war? And I said, go read the Old Testament. Yeah, it absolutely is. And God commands it in times. Well, how does that jive with thou shalt not commit murder? Well, there's a difference between war and murder, and that this is certainly a fine line, and certainly one to talk about. And with all due respect to your politics, all of our politics can kind of come into this conversation for the perception of which is which. But nevertheless, it's an interesting aspect that if we are acting in defense of people, I'm going to use I think the clearest cut example I personally think in modern times, which is probably the World War II in Germany in defense for not just the Jews, but other folks, homosexuals, other folks who were being killed. I mean, you'll probably know about the Jews who were killed in the concentration camps, but Hitler also went and killed homosexuals and gypsies, or other groups that were also persecuted against. And so for all of those groups, as he was killing them, as we came to the defense then of liberty and freedom, and then of course those people who were being murdered, not all of which, to be fair, that we knew about at the time. We didn't really know the horrors of the concentration camp when we jumped into the war. We just knew something was wrong, and that he was doing some pieces there. Yep, Poles too. A lot of ethnic groups besides. I didn't mention a lot of those, but thank you, Eileen, for mentioning that. There are a lot of Poles were there too as well. So in those, our willingness to step in and did a lot of people die on both sides? Yes, absolutely. And of course, I could speak about Japanese as well and other folks that are out there, but different parts of that war. But I think we had a pretty clear-cut, I would argue, moral agenda on that particular one, if you all follow my point. Now there's been some others here and there that, I don't know, maybe aren't quite so clear, and that's a different topic. But this a time to kill or a time to go to war, as it's sometimes interpreted, right? And a time to heal. And so, Abraham Lincoln, in talking about that, it's now time for us to bind up the wounds of this nation. And it's a great quote from him that, if I make a friend of my enemy, am I not destroying him as an enemy? Do y'all follow? You know what I'm saying? Am I not destroying my enemies by making friends out of them? And so it's a great comment. And so this time to heal, that there is a spot for us, both as a nation, as a people, as a family, to heal from some of the things that are on there. So, a time to break down and a time to build up. I've mentioned to you before that, broken ground, disturbed earth is a great place to plant a church. As we see, that when the blade of a heavy machinery cuts into the soil and things are broken free and that land is opened up, seeds that have laid dormant for years, literally, suddenly sprout to life and new growth suddenly happens. Now, that's often around building sites and so forth, but it's fascinating to see what can happen with that. A time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh. As we talk about the things that are there, the Bible tells us that if we have those around us who are close to us that are weeping and mourning, that we should weep and mourn with them. And if they are in fact rejoicing, that we should rejoice with them. And we are called with that. I think one of the most powerful pieces that I've learned from the Jewish culture is in relation to their view towards death. I mentioned this to a couple of you at times. The idea of sitting, it's called sitting Shiva with someone, and basically it's when there's a time of mourning that you will go to the home, greet the person, and then sit quietly in their home. If they want to talk, you will talk, but you will sit quietly with them because there are no words to say. And just the act of being there physically means something in that capacity. And I really believe that there's something to be said for knowing that there are simply no words, that there are no words to say. At the same time, this idea that there's time to mourn and a time to dance, that there's a time to rejoice and a time to pour forth your glories upon God and to say, God, thank you for all that you're doing in our lives. As we are caught up in this whirlwind life, I think it's easy to miss some of the essence of what it is to recognize God's timing and to watch it flow throughout our lives. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together is interesting for me. I think a time to cast away stones, if you interpret that as meaning that stones are weapons in the sense that they're for some stoning, a time to say not there, and a time to gather together, I'm not quite sure how to interpret that. Now, you could also use it as a building motif, a time to cast away stones that we're not going to have building materials in a time that we are. Either way, there's some interesting pieces there if you think through the logistics of what it is God is saying to us through Solomon and Ecclesiastes. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Is there a time when you've seen perhaps that you need to, with all due respect, give someone a hug? You need to physically be there. I think we all can agree with that, right? That you need to physically give someone a hug. And there is a time when you need to give someone their space. Is that, y'all agree with me on that? There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And that's hard when you want to embrace and the other person says, I need some space. Have y'all perhaps encountered that? Can I get a yes? Is that something you all can relate to, or an amen? Okay. Yep. Okay. So a time to seek and a time to lose. Well, this is fascinating. A time to go after those things and a time to lose and forget about. Kind of my idea of that the things of earth grow strangely dim. To lose the things that are there. A time to keep and a time to cast away. So let me pause right here as I'm kind of reading through it. Put your hands over on the keyboard with me. As we're thinking about these things of seasons, things that grow, that come up, and then they pass. What are some things that you can think about that maybe, that you maybe wouldn't often think about? Maybe like the day is something you would say, well, that each day comes and each day goes, and that maybe kind of affects you. But are there any unexpected things that you have to say, we don't talk about it, but this shall pass? Okay? That there's things in your life. Think about that for a second. That there are things that are, that may in fact do it. I mean, it could be something simple in your life, or it could be other things that are out there. I mentioned for the children that they were pets, that even if they're enjoying pets today, that they have to realize there's a point when that pet won't be there if you follow. Maybe that means it'll be a new pet. Something else would come along. Are there things in your life that you're thinking about that you realize that there's a season for these things that maybe you haven't thought about before? Okay? I had to remind myself a lot about raising Tony that this is just his phase. Yeah. And by that you mean back when she was in a somewhat rebellious stage that she was somewhat rebellious, and yep, there you go. Yep. Yeah, and so there we go. So this is just this whole period and so forth. And the things that are certainly with that. How about the rest of you? What are the other things that are kind of there? Phases of raising your children and these things, what I'm saying? So they're your children's childhood, or your grandchildren's childhood for some of us. That I'm saying that it's not going to last forever. And, so Kim, you probably know this, but there's going to come a time, right? That in fact, Christine will go and she's not going to be there. I think about for Sarah, right? Okay. How the mind loses the ability to think fast as you get older. Certainly. Okay. Eileen says romance sometimes. Sure. And so there's cycles in a romantic relationship. There's this, and it's not just linear. I really believe that it's not just linear. People talk about this stage and this stage as if it's a linear line, and I really see it more as a spiral that you kind of go through. That there's this whirlwind romance and this fire, and then it kind of goes through, and maybe it goes through some of the other stages. Amy, tractor and swamp, and some of the other ones that you kind of go through, right? But you kind of go through some of the various pieces, and then you can come back again to a new spark. And it can spiral and it can continue kind of going through. Yep. But our youth in general, absolutely. Okay. So, there's, various, things and institutions around us. If you think at a larger scale, some of the pieces, will all the things that we have around us all would be there, forever. I think back to the Roman Empire. The folks of the Roman Empire said, of course, that the empire would last forever. Well, guess what? It didn't. You know what I'm saying? That's one of the things that didn't, kind of turn that direction. And so, will we see changes? Sure, of course we will. Will things change and be different in side of how we do things in our everyday life? Absolutely. And some of the things are obvious. But at any rate, I think it's important to think about that change is a normal piece of it, and that there is, as God says, that for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. He continues on in verse 7, a time to tear and a time to sow. So in a practical sense, in the real world, when's it a time to tear? When is it ever a good idea to tear things? I mean, it sounds horrible. When would you go and in a practical sense, when would you do that? Would you always sew together a garment? Isn't it always, wouldn't you always go through and do it? So Kim says time to let go things that need to go. Yeah, no, exactly. So there's a time when you perhaps repaired a garment so many times that it's time to tear it apart into rags or to other things that you would use it for, to say that this is done. This thing is done. Do any of you have physical objects like that you have worn down and perhaps go through and say that I don't want to give this up even though it's probably used up, or you would hate when this thing gets used up? Is there a physical object? Eileen says that she just tear apart the parts of our lives that no longer work. I think that's a great analogy for it, Eileen. I think that's awesome. Do you have any physical objects that you're kind of attached to? That you okay? My favorite lounge pants, she says. That you would hate to see them go, or perhaps they already should go, right? Do you have any of that? Do you have any worn out things like that? That you have things that are like, okay, so what are some examples? What are some examples of things in your life that you really should, it's pretty well wore out and you go through? Okay, your favorite sandals. Okay. That, but it's hard to let them go because you're used to them. And it's not a question of whether you've broken them in or maybe they've broken your feet in. One of the two, right? Okay. Finally thread a down-filled comforter, feathers everywhere. Yep. Okay, there you go. So these are types of things that there is a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence. They wound up in a round filling Arizona. That's great. All right. So a time to keep silent and a time to speak. Would you all agree with that? That there was a time to speak, to be quiet about things and say it's not yet there, it's not yet, this is not something yet to share. And then there's a time to speak about some things. And that's hard because if you're like me and you like to talk and you like to share, if you all follow some of the things. If you have things that it's not right, at least you feel it's not right in God's timing to speak about things, then okay, hold on, and then it's finally a time to speak, and now it's time, maybe it's hard to get going. Now it's hard to actually say the things that need to be said. A time to love and a time to hate. Well, okay, so we're Christians, so a time to love is kind of easy. God is love, and that's pretty easy. But let's talk about the hard one. What is a time to hate, or what is a thing that God is calling us to hate? That's kind of a little challenging. Okay, that was the easy one, and then it goes sin. Right, to go through and hate sin. Yes, absolutely. Sin, the consequences of sin, the things that are there, absolutely. That that there is a time to hate and be able to say that we have this idea of whatever this thing is, that this is wrong, and we need to say it's wrong. And I've said that before, that there are times in our life when you need to be cautious and gracious, and you need to be to extend faith and extend grace to people. And then there is a time when you need to say that is sin, that is wrong, particularly with all due respect if they ask you. Okay, and that is very difficult for me at times. In fact, it's extraordinarily difficult when someone comes to me and they want to ask me a question. Carl, is this wrong? Is this against the Bible? Do you think this is wrong? And I almost want to say, don't ask the question if you don't want the answer. Okay? Because I can see it in their eyes. They're looking for me to put approval upon something that I disagree with. And if you ask the question, I'm going to probably, I'm either going to not answer or I'm going to tell you the truth. But I'm not going to, you know what I'm saying? I mean, this is really hard for me. And so if you have something that's there and you ask me the question, particularly if you phrase it in a biblical context, and Carl, in your opinion, is this wrong according to the Bible? Okay, I'm going to tell you the answer now, and this may not be the answer that you're looking for. In fact, the fact that you're asking the question probably means you're not going to like the answer. And if that's someone that is extraordinarily dear to me, well, that's really challenging. Let me go with that. So, but nevertheless, that's the way things are. So, time for war and a time for peace. I kind of covered that a little bit already. What gain has the worker from his toil? So at this point, Solomon now transitions and starts going back to this previous themes that he mentioned in Ecclesiastes 1 and 2. So what gain has the worker from his toil? He's saying, well, you do all this stuff. What do you have to prove from it? Even if you build up phenomenal things, you're going to die, and you're going to have to give it to somebody else. Now, I mentioned before that I disagree with Solomon on some of these key points. What he sees as loss and a problem, I see as a tremendous advantage. To work and to build up and then to hand over to someone else, it's actually kind of a pattern in my life. It's something that I've done multiple times, and I think it's a biblical pattern. And it's sort of interesting. Some of you, does anybody know Mr. Moody of Moody College fame? That might be a little turn of the century. He's from Chicago. That ring name? Yep. I was counting on you, Eileen. You'd probably throw in there. Yeah. So when Moody was asked, sort of a strange question, or a strange answer. What would you do if you knew Jesus was coming back tomorrow? And his answer was, I would go plant trees. And as to how to interpret his answer, whether he means plants biblical seed and gospel seed, or whether he meant physical seed, I'm not sure I know the answer. But the point is, he would leave things for those who will be left behind. If you follow, is my interpretation of his answer, which I find fascinating. You know what I'm saying? And that he would never see them grow. Does that make sense? That he knew he would be raptured up and he'd be gone. And yet he would do this. If that's what I had left to do today, that's what I'd be doing today. And so it's fascinating as we talk about this. What gain has the worker from? Yeah, there's the S. What gain has the worker from his toil? And he, Solomon's asking here, and he said, I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. True. And I love that Solomon says that. I'll say that again. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Even when there's tragedy in our lives, God can use and does use that tragedy to bring something beautiful. Okay? So Stephen Curtis Chapman sings about the death of his daughter when he sings, Beauty from Ashes, or From the Ashes We Will Rise, if you all listen to some of those songs. And so now the work that he's now done in China, his daughter that passed away was from China, was an orphan that was adopted. And so the work that Stephen Curtis Chapman now has been doing in China and building orphanages and other things over there, It's really phenomenal that there's beauty shall rise is the name of one of the songs there, that we shall rise from the ashes. And it makes everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and do good as long as they live. It's interesting. I'll say that again. I perceive there's nothing better for them, nothing better for each one of you to do than to be joyful and do good as long as you live. I would agree with that. I think that's a fair statement. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. And if he's saying that it is our pleasure to be able to work, and this is the way I would say it, that my ultimate boss is Jesus Christ. And so when I go to work each day, we're working for him. And, I've had some challenging days, to be honest with you, in the last couple months at work. But okay, if I'm doing this for God's glory, then so be it. And let me see what I can do to be able to work for him and show him that I'm trying to show myself approved and do the best I can for him. So I perceive that nothing God doers, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. It's an important statement. We talked about this before, that if you build the house by yourself, it means nothing. But if God builds the house with you and is the one you're building the house for, then it lasts forever. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. This is re-echoing his statement that there's nothing new under the sun. There's no new thing that's good you can do, and there's no new bad thing you can do. It's all really been done before. And God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. So this is where Solomon, I believe, is saying that even when we're trying to do good, even in the places where we try and do things for ourselves, in the sense that we're doing it, we're doing justice, but for us, there's wickedness. In the place of righteousness, even in the Holy of Holies, if we're there inside the temple in Jerusalem, and even the place of righteousness, Solomon is seeing with his own eyes, even there's wickedness, because man brings it in, of course. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. Let me pause here for a second. So my viewpoint of life, of how life on earth works, is that there's there's three different levels, basically, is what I was taught in systematic theology of life here on earth. Things, at least we understand it, that are not sentient beings, at least not in the sense that we comprehend. I would say plants, although I recognize plants respond to stimuli and those kinds of things, but they're not sentient in the sense that we understand them. There are sentient beings like animals, the pets we've talked about, the dogs, the horses, and all those types of things. And then there are created spiritual beings, of which there are very few. Humans are one. What's another example? What's another example of created spiritual beings? Yeah, angels would be another example like that. There may be others or other classes of things like that, but those are the two good examples we have, humans and angels. Angels and man, as it were. And so there is a spiritual component to us. And speaking about humans, for example, that we are different. People ask the question sometimes, so what's the difference between, you and a cow? You're eating a hamburger. There's no difference between you two. You both have similar DNA. You both have, hemoglobin in your blood. You're similar. What's the difference? If you're killing a cow, it's murder. And my answer would be, no, I'm sorry. The word murder is reserved for killing another human. And specifically in biblical terms, because that person has a spirit, which is a different component, it's a different level, and that's a different viewpoint. So, no, it's not actually the same. There is, in fact, a difference. So, there's an aspect I agree with that Solomon is saying here. They're saying they may see for themselves as but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. Well, okay, it's the same that we both physically die. That I totally agree with Solomon on. No question about that. As one dies, so does the other. Totally true. Now, this is fascinating when he expresses this. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts for all his vanity. And I certainly agree with him in the sense that he's saying there's no advantage in the sense that we're both going to die. That I agree with. We both, both of them don't have oxygen. Both of them die. Man, cow, both are going to die. Totally agree with him on that particular point. Now, fascinating part here. All go to one place. And I think it means that the bodies all go to one place. Totally agree with that. All are from the dust, and to the dust will return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So he's asking this rhetorically, and in the Hebrew, this implies that he disagrees with the answer to his own question, just so you all know. You can't totally infer from it, but he's saying, well, who knows? Maybe that, man goes upward and then goes there, but who knows? Maybe not. And the implied answer is probably not, that maybe not be what happened. So some of you have very close attachments to your pets, and you're hoping to see your pets again in heaven. Believe it or not, this verse is not a bad indication that maybe you will. I'll comment. I've been asked before, will we have animals in heaven? And I think that the answer to that is yes. You can read some of the New Heaven and New Earth, pieces. I think that there will be some animals, and I don't see any reason why pets couldn't be there. Certainly it's possible. This is an interesting piece on that particular point. That if you want to hold on to that one as an example, it's taken as a negative question that he's saying, hey, I'm not sure that's what happens at all. Is sort of what Solomon's saying here. So I saw that there is nothing better than a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. And I think we'll leave it at that. There's nothing better than for the work of your hands, the things that you're doing each and every day, to rejoice in it, and obviously to give it over to God. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Who then can take and say what will come after you pass? Let's do a couple quick takeaways. I think I have 2, maybe 3. I think I have 3 for this particular week. Number 1, all things of this earth will one day pass away. All things of this earth will one day pass away. And I think you understand that, but it's important to think about. There's nothing here on this earth that's going to be permanent. Everything that's here, there'll be a new heaven and a new earth, and it will all be different than it is now. So, from that perspective, the state of Virginia, which I am in, will not exist forever. There's a concept. The various things that are around us, the buildings, the pieces, and so forth, will all one day pass away. Everything that's here goes away. And some of them, with all due respect, much, much quicker than others. So whether we're talking about goldfish or pets or even people or the things that are around us, things change and things will pass. And how we deal with those times and seasons, I think, is very important. There's a song, I told Sheree, I said, this is going to be pretty funny. I'm going to quote a song about closing a bar. Some of you may know the song. It's called Closing Time. But I thought this one was particularly important. There's some great philosophy here. This is not biblical, but there's great philosophy here that's there. Closing time, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I've edited out some stuff. These are some selections. Closing time, time for you to go out to the places you will be from. You think about that for a second. Okay. And then, of course, the kicker, closing time, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. I really believe that. And I was like, wow, that's actually a very appropriate biblical viewpoint and a very strange song about closing out a bar for the evening. But nevertheless, I don't know who that artist was, what I'm saying, who wrote that lyric, but that was kind of funny, right? And there you go. Oh, Eileen had commented before that his father said it wouldn't be heaven for him if his horse wasn't there. Well, hopefully that worked out well. There you go. All right. So number 2, listen hard to what God is trying to tell you. Listen hard to what God is trying to tell you. So it's interesting, as time and seasons come, I really honestly believe that the Holy Spirit will give you clues, that he'll speak to your heart. And so Sheree and I have talked for years. We've done this enough times where we've been pulled up from one location and moved to another. We've been pulled from one ministry, moved to another. And it's enough times now that we can start to see patterns in it to go forth and do that. And that we call it uprooting, that we kind of feel God, going through this uprooting process with us and kind of going through that. Now, one of the things that's funny about this is that, we've said for years that we're pretty good from our perspective, at least we think, we're okay. We're okay at hearing God's voice, what God wants us to do. I think that's a fair statement. Sheree's nodding her head, yes. We suck at being able to hear his timing. Okay, and I'm almost always early. Okay, is the problem. And so when I hear things, I'm sorry, God, but I feel like He shows me too early. You know what I'm saying? It's going on, and so it's sort of a process, and so it's sort of interesting in that regard. So listen hard to what God's trying to tell you, and with that, number 3, you might find that there is a regular pattern when the change of season comes into your life. In time, you may find a regular pattern. This is that uprooting I was talking about, that there's things that we can tell that we look at this, and we're like, oh, we're being uprooted. Things are changing in our lives. And if you can get to that point where you can feel that wind of change that's there, that you realize the seasons are turning, that you feel yourself going then slowly, that it's becoming fall, it's becoming winter, and then you wait, and you go in the winter, and the uprooting happens in the winter, and then it's spring, and you're going to plant somewhere new, and new things are happening in your life. And if you can learn that pattern, it's a lot less traumatic, okay? And you just got to, we talk about it all the time, that if you hold on super, super tight, so hard to things in your life that your knuckles turn white, it really hurts when God pries your knuckles open. So hold everything of this world loosely, and when God says, I need to take that out of your hand now, it won't hurt so much when He opens your hand to take it out so that your hands are empty, so He can put something even better into them. The question for the week: what is God telling me is about to change? What is God telling me is about to change? Guys, there's always change in your life. There always has been, and there always will be. So I would just encourage you to listen to God about where He is, He's directing you, and where it is that He will change and make different. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, Heavenly Father, I thank You for all that You're doing with us, and I just ask You bless each and every one who's listening to us today or perhaps over the internet. And God, I would just ask that You give us a sense of peace when we let You open our fingers and take out what we have held so dear. And as we wait expectantly for whatever the new thing is, You will place into them. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.